So you and I did talk a little bit before, and what I do know about National Insurance Inspection Services is that the company started out as a service-oriented company and operated that way for many years. Now, I'd like to see sort of where you were, where you are, and where you guys are going in that 3 to 5 year vision, both in terms of the company itself, what you see for the industry, and then how your technology is going to help drive change within the industry.
Yeah, National Insurance Inspection Services kicked off a little over 20 years ago now. We're based in Fresno, California. We have provided field underwriting inspections to insurance carriers and MGAs, some larger brokerages for over 20 years now, right? So I always like to stress that, we work 100% on the underwriting side, right? So a lot of folks, as soon as they hear the word inspection and insurance, they automatically think claims, right?
Yep.
And we do absolutely nothing with claims whatsoever. We never have. Maybe we will at some point in the future, but we have not up to this point. So all of the work that we're doing is on the front end of the insurance transaction, underwriting, and then beyond that, we're also a little bit unique in that we have always focused 99% on personal lines, residential properties, right? So primarily single family dwellings, and that's just kind of been our niche, I guess you might call it, and what we know best, and really where we have excelled.
Same for us.
Yeah.
Same for us. I mean, historically, 80 to 90% residential property.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So, and we've had tons of opportunity. I've turned away more commercial business than sometimes than I like to think about. But again, it's just, we have over the years kind of strategically said, we're not going to get distracted by opportunities here and there, as long as we're as busy as we want to be doing what we're good at and what we know.
Yeah.
Then why get distracted and branch out, right? We want to be the master of one thing, right?
Or were you just smarter than most people and knew your ideal customer profile early on?
Yeah, I think it was probably a little bit of both. Certainly over time, it has become a much more strategic decision, than it was early on. And we did have some, we dipped our toes into a very small amount of commercial, over the years, but we weren't doing enough of it to actually build systems and processes around it, right? Yeah. So it was kind of always just this like a la carte thing. And when you do it that way, it's really hard to even do it profitably, right? So yeah, that's kind of where we've come from. We've done that for 2 decades and worked with most of the tier 1 carriers, from the top on the personal line side, all the way down to lots of super regionals and single state mutuals and right down to even, some of the larger brokerages. So at the end of the day, if someone wants to look at a residential property for underwriting purposes, we would do that for them. So we've, operated with a network of independent contractor inspectors, around the country. Generally speaking, we have somewhere between 800 and 900 inspectors, that we're working with at any given time and offering those field inspection services. Well, it's kind of varied. 49 states. I would like to say that we're nationwide, but we've never done field inspections in Alaska. But in the 49 other states, we've offered field inspection services. So, and we've done many, many millions of them, over the last 20 years. So it's been very interesting. So as far as, kind of the next piece of our story up to this point was about 7.5 years ago, we were chatting with one of our regional carrier partners, and they were starting to write a lot of rental policies, right? For tenants. They said, hey, we're always trying to figure out, like, how do we set the, contents coverage at an appropriate level? We have people that are asking for, $20,000 of coverage, right, for their contents as a tenant. And, we have no way to validate, like, what do they have here? Is that appropriate or is it not appropriate? And they said, well, what if there was a way for us to like document the contents inside this apartment, right? And, that could potentially help at least give us an idea of what the, proper coverage amount would be. And then also obviously would be extremely valuable in a claim scenario, right? Hey, what is involved here in the loss? And, could certainly help out the policyholder with verifying what they lost, right? And so we said, hey, yeah, that sounds like a cool idea. If we built that, would you use it? And they said, yeah, absolutely. So that kind of, kicked us off in roughly a 14-month-ish kind of development cycle, and we built out a self-inspection platform that we call eSurvey. And that was kind of the very first use case, was just to document contents for renters policies.
That's very interesting that it started with contents.
Yeah, looking back, it's extremely interesting. And the ironic part is that use case never really took off for us. And we're literally not doing any of that today. I think it's still a valid use case, but it just hasn't gotten traction for us. But that very quickly and naturally, once we had that platform up and running, about 6.5 years ago, it just kind of naturally led to, hey, like, let's not just document contents, right? Let's go ahead and document the entire home and property. And if you engage a policyholder in the process of taking photos, you can ask them to take photos of whatever, right? So we kind of moved in that direction and built out some more features and functionality to make that a more robust process. And so I started pitching that.
Was the original tool to help your fleet of inspectors do a better, more efficient job, or was it originally built for self-inspection?
Yeah, it was originally built for self-inspection.
Okay.
So it was not intended to be used by our inspectors. Gotcha. Right from day one. It was intended to be utilized by a policyholder. Yeah. Once we had the platform up and running, I was pitching it to all of our existing carrier partners, folks that we were already contracted with for field inspections. And it was a tough sell. It really was. It was really
you said it was a tough sell?
It was a tough sell.
Really?
Nobody wants to be early adopter, right?
Yeah.
Everybody said, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Would it really work? Can you show us some data? Show us some examples of somebody else that's using it successfully, right? Well, until you have, some adoption, like somebody's got to be the first mover, right?
Yep.
So it was slow going there for the first couple years. We did have a handful of carriers that we did pilots with, and then we had, I think, 2 that we were, ended up moving beyond a pilot and into full production with, but at a super small scale, right? Like we were doing a couple hundred a month, maybe, with everyone. So, but that gave us an opportunity to kind of work the kinks out of the system and learn kind of what worked and what didn't work in a lot of different areas. And then COVID hit, and literally every carrier partner that we had that I had been pitching self-inspection to for the previous 24 months, they started, beating the doors down, right? Like the phone was ringing off the hook. Hey, Curtis, remember that self-inspection thing you told us about? Are you guys still doing that?
Crazy, right?
And it was absolute rocket fuel, right? So that just, very quickly put us at scale with a bunch. I think within the first 6 months of COVID, we went from 2 carriers in production to 12, I believe.
So that tool, does it require a NAP download, or is it stream?
Yeah, so we early on decided to go the mobile web app route versus a native app. And honestly, I wasn't super confident in that decision, 6 years ago when we started.
Yep. It was bold at that time.
Yes, it was. And one of the things that we struggled with back then, and not to get too deep into the technical weeds, because I'm not good in the technical weeds, but back then, 6 years ago, you had a lot less control over the native functionality of mobile devices in a mobile web app environment versus a native app, right? As soon as you did a native app, now you have full control over all of the native functionalities, whether that's for geolocation purposes, GPS, the camera, right? Like all of that, you have a lot more control. So anyway, we really saw that download and installation of what a consumer perceives to be a single use application. We really felt like that was going to be a significant hurdle to adoption.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Looking back now, I'm really grateful that we made that decision. I'm 100% confident it was the right decision.
Yep.
And fast forward to today, and now technology has moved forward, right? So you're really not missing out on much control at all in the mobile web app versus a native app environment. So,
and it's a little bit different perceptually, I'll say anyway, from the claim side, from underwriting. Generally speaking, on underwriting, you're not going to have any concerns about, connectivity. Whereas on the claim side, oftentimes, in a disaster zone anyway,
Mm.
that's always a little bit of a concern. But,
Yeah.
that was a similar decision that I made, 20 years ago that, internet's going to be ubiquitous. And, if the local infrastructure is not there, there are methods of getting connectivity that can be brought in. And if not, 20, 30 miles away, you can do your work and then go get connected. So, in a similar situation, we never have built a mobile app, a native app. And
Yeah.
it was I think a bold decision, and one where I looked at it a lot of ways like you. I was concerned about, the interoperability of so many different platforms and having to provide customer service for that. And I just felt like, man, oh man, this is going to be a nightmare. So we actually waited out the crowd and then came back and built for mobile.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and it
Yeah,
turned out to
no.
be the right decision in hindsight as well.
Yep. Yeah. No, and we, we did too. And to backtrack on the question you asked earlier, we, since then have built out a mobile app for our inspectors specifically, right? For the field inspection
Yeah,
side
yep.
of our business. And that is built out as a native app, right? And that makes a lot more sense because you're not dealing with millions of consumers, right? I'm
Yeah.
dealing with hundreds of inspectors that that I'm contracted with. So
Yep.
that's kind of the direction that we went with that. And then again, through COVID, that really put us at scale, and knock on wood, post COVID, there's no slowing down. It's just the industry is shifting in that direction for a lot of different reasons. It's
a good time to be you.
Yeah, there's so many pressures, hard market, if you want to call it that, and otherwise just so many factors that are putting so much pressure on the personal lines market now that it's kind of become a no-brainer, and virtually every carrier, MGA, et cetera, is, exploring self-inspection for underwriting at the very least, if they've not already adopted a solution. And now we're already seeing, it's kind of funny how this has evolved, but we're already seeing kind of the first wave of carriers they adopted self-inspection, right, through COVID when they had to. And so, they onboarded a vendor, whether that was us or, one of our competitors. There's, a decent number of us out there doing self-inspection now. And now they're getting around to like, hey, let's look around. What are our options, right? And so we're starting to see carriers that are, have been with one of our competitors for, 3 years or 2 years or whatever. And now they're, looking around and saying, hey, let's make sure that we're with the best possible option here, right? So we're kind of seeing that first wave of carriers who have adopted self-inspection, and now they're looking like, hey, is there a better option here? Can we improve, on this with a different vendor or whatever the case may be?
I mean, generally speaking, the technology available to one is the technology available to any.
Yep.
So how does your company or how do any of the competitors differentiate themselves from a technology perspective? And it otherwise it becomes commoditized and it's all about price, right? And then when you get to price, it's a race to the bottom. So, is it a service level agreement that backs up the technology, or how do you guys sort of set yourself apart? What else are you seeing out there that people are doing that makes them competitive?
It's a bit of a deep rabbit hole that we can go down, but I think a couple different things, right? One, I would say policyholder adoption remains kind of like the elephant in the room per se, right?
Yeah.
That has to be addressed, right? That is a big differentiator. But I guess just a synopsis of that is, at the end of the day, self-inspection, especially for underwriting, is a new concept to consumers,
right?
By and large, right?
Right. You're asking them to do something they never had to do before, and they want to know why. Yeah,
exactly. And 99% of the time they've never heard of this, right?
Yeah.
And we see it in policyholder feedback all the time, right? I've been with XYZ carrier for 40 years and I've never had to do this, right? Why do I have to do this now? Very valid, because they're absolutely correct. They have been with XYZ company for 40 years and they've never had to do a self-inspection before. That is an accurate statement. What we have worked on and continue to work on, part of it is workflow. How can we provide the best user experience, right? Some of that is on the technical side from the user interface and whatnot. Some of it is again from a very practical workflow of how does our web app direct people through the process, right? What's step one? What's step two? What's step three? What order should they be doing things, right? And again, the smoother of a user experience you can provide, the more people will actually follow through with the entire process, right? And complete the self-inspection. So there's that piece of it. Alongside that also is, figuring out literally from a messaging standpoint, like what will motivate people to actually do this, right? So, we're sending out text message and email invitations to policyholders on behalf of their carrier, right? What is the verbiage of those messages, right? How do we educate them? And to what level do we educate them on what this is and why it's important and what are the benefits for them, right? Why should they do it? What's in it for me type of scenario, right? So, so those are the types of things that we've been iterating on for 6 years now. And we fortunately have the benefit of most of our competitors have not been doing that for nearly as long as we have, right? I would say the majority of our competitors were kind of scrambling in the first year of COVID to throw something together, right, to meet the demand. We had the benefit of
oftentimes what you see is there's some really smart tech people out there that can build the fanciest whiz bang, whatever, but they have no idea about those underlying emotional things, the human aspect of it that your experience, even through the pre-tech days, your company had all that. You've dealt with all these people, you've done millions of inspections, so you know what it's like dealing with folks and you can anticipate that. So that's super smart.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's definitely a significant advantage that that we're fortunate to have. So anyway, I mean, I guess to get back to your question on the differentiation, that that's a big piece, right? Like you're never going to get 100% of your policyholders to actually do a self-inspection, right? But obviously the higher percentage of them that you can convince to do it, the better. And a good bit of that does fall back on the vendor, understanding that piece of it and figuring out, okay, what will it take to motivate and how can we message to policyholders? And
do you ever, and I am going to interrupt you a little bit, and I'm going to throw you off track here because I think it really is, you're cutting to the heart of it. And it's that part about, you really are transitioning and re-educating a public about doing something they've never done before. So I am curious about that. And so, do you ever have someone who initially says no and you somehow smack them upside the head and say, no, you're going to do this? Or or you just take a no as a no and move along?
Yeah, well, I would say, first of all, metaphorically, yes, there's no physical violence involved.
That's good.
But yes, absolutely. I mean, we have what we call our e-support department, right? So we've got we've got a team on our side that provides phone and email support to policyholders, and we field dozens, sometimes 100 plus calls on a daily basis from policyholders saying, hey, what is this? Should I do this? Shouldn't I do this? Do I have to do this? Do I not? Because again, it's a brand new thing, right? People have never done this before, and so
it could be a concern that it's a scam.
Yep. Oh, absolutely. We hear that all the time. Is this a scam? And especially it's a very personal thing, right? You're asking someone
you're opening up the inside of your home.
Exactly. You're essentially inviting, a stranger inside your home in the same way that you would if a field inspector was there on site.
Hey,
right?
Come take some pictures of my bathroom.
Yes, exactly. People are very rightfully skeptical, right? And and that's not a bad thing. We all should be that way nowadays. But again, that's we've got a team that can help talk people through that, and even beyond that, like some of the simple things that we've learned, not to throw out too much of the secret sauce, right?
Yeah.
But again, a lot of that ties back to the messaging, right? Like if a policyholder is just receiving what they perceive to be a random text message, right, that just says, hey, welcome to your self-inspection. Well, they have no idea, you know what I mean? They have no idea who that text message is from, or they're not going to tap on the link in the text message, right? Like hopefully, by and large, consumers have been trained to not do that, right? Like don't tap on a link if you aren't familiar with, with what's going on here. So again, making sure that messaging ties directly back to their carrier, even more importantly, ties back directly to their agent and, their agency, so that it makes that mental click and connection, and they say,
Yeah.
oh, wait a second, okay, this is, if there's some at least some level of familiarity there, right, where it makes sense and it doesn't appear completely random.
Curtis,
that can have a big impact.
It is interesting that you say that because, we do a lot of these same things from the claim perspective. And that is a big issue. And, when I had a conversation just yesterday with one of our carrier clients, and they're like, well, how does the insured know to expect this? And I'm like, well, I can't, I can help you in some ways with that, but you really have to move upstream and you have to educate the consumer before the loss occurs. So when does that happen? It happens during the agency broker time, right? Where you're selling a policy and you're educating the person about what they're buying, right? And then so you get the SMS opt-in at that point in time, not when they're under duress. So, I love hearing what you're saying, and it's a message that I need to help communicate to our carrier clients because, in my view, oftentimes it's not about the education, it's about getting the sale. And they really need to rethink about some of that information that is critical during the claims process and that education of the consumer and telling them what the expectation is. And hey, if you have a claim, here's what you're going to expect. And it is, if they get a random text or a random call, which, we do a lot of that, and it's immensely helpful, particularly during a high volume surge.
Yeah.
Those omnichannel communications. But yeah, we run into the same thing that you're talking about there is, a lot of people just hang up, don't respond to the text or whatever. And it's probably what I would do too, had I not had that prior education experience.
No, absolutely. And I would share this anecdotally, but you hit the nail on the head in terms of, for us, I'm selling the concept and the product of self-inspection to a carrier, right? The carrier has to sell it to their distribution channels, right? And again, when I say sell it, I mean the concept, right? Like, hey, this is the way that we do things now, right? Like, this is new. And so the carrier, I sell it to the carrier has to sell it to their distribution force. And then distribution has to sell it to the policyholder, right? Yeah. And again, when I say sell it, I just mean at the very least make them aware of it, right? Because it is a brand new thing. The problem there, in our world of underwriting inspections, carriers have approached it in such a scattered way with very little consistency. And to some extent, I understand that. But I'll just give you an example and tie this thought together, right? I spent time as a captive agent, right, with Farm Bureau in Michigan a long time ago. And that was a captive, right? I'm literally just writing with Farm Bureau. As an agent, I had no idea when I wrote a piece of new business, if I wrote a new HO3 policy, right? I had no idea whether or not that property was going to be inspected for underwriting, right? It might be, it might not be, right? It was like a 50-50, but I had no idea.
So it was just random?
So it was just random, right? And so I don't think it was random in terms of from an underwriter's perspective, right? Like there was an algorithm or whatever, right? Like if the Cov-A was a certain amount, over a certain threshold, and the year built was under a certain threshold, right? There's half a dozen different variables that we as agents didn't know exactly what that was.
Gotcha.
Like it's really tough for me as an agent to have the inspection conversation at the point of sale for two different reasons. Number one, because I don't even know if it's going to happen, right? And I don't want to tell my new prospective client, well, I don't know what's going on here. Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, right? Like I'm supposed to be the expert here.
It depends on your algorithm.
Yes, right. I'm not going to, paint myself as the idiot here who doesn't know what's going on with my own insurance company, right?
Yeah, it's funny.
So there's that piece of it. But then beyond that, like just the word inspection, like that adds friction to the like that's a negative term, right?
Yeah.
Like nobody wants to have their home inspected, right? When I have just, onboarded this new client, right? I've just developed this new partnership and I'm their trusted advisor now, right? Like the last thing that I want to do is throw this friction into the process, right? And say, hey, guess what? Going to be an inspection on your property. Like nobody likes to hear that. So because of those dynamics, and I've talked to a lot of agents about this just over the last 12 months, a high percentage of agents, right? Like it is not a part of their sales process, closing process, or any, right? Like they're not talking about inspection with their new clients, right?
Yeah.
They're just not. Now what carriers are asking them is like, hey, you need to talk about inspection. You need to talk about self-inspection, right? And set expectations for a policyholder. And that's a tough thing for carriers to sell to their agents when they've never had to do that before, right? It's a brand new process. And so what we have seen and what our experience has been, we launched with a large carrier here a while back that's in a captive environment, right? For the first 3 months, we were getting calls on a regular basis from policyholders saying, hey, quit texting me, quit emailing me. I talked to my agent and they said that this is a scam. It's like,
uh-oh.
So I think that underscores a couple things. Number one, and it doesn't matter if it's captive or independent, right? But there's different variables with each. Like those communication channels from carrier to agent, even in the captive world, right? Where you would think that it would be a lot tighter. Like that's tough. It is tough to clearly communicate major changes, from home office to 20,000 agencies, right?
Yeah.
Like that is a monumental challenge. So I understand it, but those are kind of some of the hurdles that we're facing together with carriers as kind of the industry moves towards the self-inspection model.
Yeah. So, I've heard the statement about change that, people say they don't like change. And then, there's a philosophy that, hey, people actually like change, but they have to understand how it benefits them.
Yes.
And then in that scenario, the salespeople are like, okay, you want me to do this new thing because it's going to help me get less money?
Exactly.
So that might be a bit of a tough sale. I can certainly appreciate that, but yeah, it needs to happen.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And it's, there are a couple things that I'm most excited about. Yeah. Number one, it is getting better over time, as if carriers are consistently messaging that, right. And positioning it, agents and agencies will start to get used to it. They will adopt that change over time. And then on the consumer side, we're also seeing that shift as well, right? Where consumers, at large are getting more comfortable with self-service digital type workflows, right? I think in the insurance world, a growing number of them have experienced something similar on the claims side, right? I had a claim 2-3 years ago almost, with a large national auto carrier, got an offender bender, right? And, they sent me a link and I took photos through the mobile app and it was a great experience, honestly.
Hey, we do that.
Yeah. Again, I just think, and like that's across the board, it might be you switch cable companies, right? And get the self-service option to install your own modem, right? And like that's a digital experience, guided through a mobile app or whatever the case may be, right? So there's that piece of it where just consumers at large are getting more comfortable with those types of, kind of DIY digital workflows. And the other thing that I would say that's been really interesting is, we don't specifically track demographic data because generally speaking, our carrier partners don't provide that to us, right? Like we're not handling date of birth, for policyholders. It's not a data point that they pass to us. However, we do see on a daily basis, anecdotally, this might sound a little odd, but it's just the reality of it, right? We're asking policyholders to take photos inside their home. They're taking photos of their bathrooms. And so we see tons of policyholders in the mirror of their bathrooms, right? Holding their cell phone, taking a photo of their bathroom. And, we do some stuff there to blur out faces and that type of thing, just from a privacy perspective. The point being, you would not believe the number of folks that are well up in years. Here's grandma. I literally have this photo, that that I talk about often. It's actually a gentleman. He's got to be over 80 years old. He's standing with his walker. He's literally one hand on his walker, one hand holding his iPhone 13, and you can literally see the tennis balls on the feet of his walker. And he's snapping a photo of his bathroom, with his iPhone. And that dude completed his self-inspection, and like, We see that on a regular basis. It is not just a younger demographic and a younger generation that's completing self-inspections, like it is across the spectrum.
I'll put it this way. I was wondering where the story was going, and I'm glad you used tennis.
Yes. There certainly is an aspect of that demographic shift happening, right? Where a younger demographic is absolutely more inclined, to complete a digital workflow. But the point being,
that's a great potential marketing piece there. You ask that guy, can I use his phone? Hey, if he can do it, anybody can do it.
Absolutely. If Grandpa can do it, you know what?
That's when you decided to buy all in and say, you know what, we're on to something. Look at Grandpa. Right. Look at Grandpa doing his self-inspection.
Yeah.
So all right. So let's transition a little bit to where you are today. Where do you see the industry? I guess specifically with regard to self-insured inspections and your company, and what is the technology going to change, get better, or is it mostly there? Is the industry going to get dragged along, which it sounds like that's well underway, which is very encouraging. We're not on the underwriting side, but to the extent that anybody in any aspect of the life cycle of the whole insurance process can drag the industry along and get them to think in different ways, it benefits all of us, right?
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. I think a couple different things that I'm excited about, moving forward. Obviously, more widespread adoption. More and more carriers, MGA. It's kind of like working its way down the food chain. And nobody's the early adopter now, right? It's becoming mainstream with a lot of carriers. So that's exciting to see the industry moving in that direction. And really what is, again, like through COVID, it just became a necessity, right? There was literally no other option for carriers to get inside properties for inspection purposes. But now that we're outside of COVID, we're still doing a lot of field inspections, right? We still have our inspector network. It is shifting slowly more in favor of self-inspection, and I think that will continue. But the other factors that are really driving that is just it's economics, carriers' needs for more comprehensive data, right? Let's talk about both of those just briefly, right? I think I would probably put the economics piece second, but we'll talk about that one first, right? It has never been more expensive to get field inspections done, right?
100%.
To get a body, and that's no different on the claims side, right? Yep. You're very well acquainted with that.
Yep.
And so on our side in the underwriting inspection world, every inspection vendor is really, really struggling, with that, right? Carriers are used to paying a certain price, right? They for years and years have budgeted a certain amount for, their underwriting expenses. And, and those costs have slowly crept up, obviously over the last 2 decades. But now, COVID, inflation, right? Just nationwide inflation in general, gas prices, quite frankly, are a huge deal, right? When you have hundreds of inspectors driving, hundreds of thousands of miles crisscrossing the country, their fuel costs have gone up exponentially. So all of those things are just making it significantly more expensive to get field inspections done. And so carriers are having to deal with that, right? And no carrier is looking to spend more money on their vendors, right?
Yeah.
So self-inspection helps relieve a lot of that pressure. When we remove an inspector from the equation, that makes the self-inspection much more cost effective. So there's that piece of it that just makes a whole lot of sense for carriers. But the other piece that's, a little bit deeper is, when you look at personal lines underwriting performance, over the last few years, it's just been an absolute bloodbath,
Yep.
Virtually no carriers are making money on personal lines, right? You're looking at loss ratios and combined ratios that are just, it's wild, right?
Yeah, I used to think that was, just a Florida, Louisiana, big cat exposed thing. It's really not. I mean, it's nationwide now. Yeah. And it speaks to a whole lot more than, just these big events. It is somewhat, climate change driven and behind it. But there's other factors at play for sure. And, there's even some that, it's not your kitty cats, as they call them, or the convective storms, which is huge as well. Mm-hmm. So there's sort of macro impacts out there that, I tell you personally, I'm going to tell you this the other day, but my homeowners we bought the house roughly 20 years ago. I think it was about 4,500 a year. Started going up dramatically 4 or 5 years ago. Went to 8, then 10, then 12, and 14 was the highest I paid, and I got my premium this year, and it was 69.
Yeah.
And I went to the pool. So, and I didn't jump in my pool. I went to the
Yep,
insurance
yep.
pool. I maybe I did jump in the pool. I mean, it came out and called my. But anyway, yeah, it's bad. It's bad.
Yeah, it is. And what that is revealing, and I'm careful how I say this, it is bringing to light the inadequacy of, I call it the old school way of doing things, right, on underwriting for personal lines. And that's not necessarily a criticism, because the old school way worked for a lot of years, but it doesn't work anymore, and it will not work into the future. And to drill down on that just a little bit, what that looks like very practically is so many carriers for their, what we call just Main Street business, right? For just kind of the average run of the mill HO3 policy, let's say, Cov A from, 100 grand up to 500 grand, right?
Yeah.
Just kind of those standard, whatever that is, 80% of
probably 80-90% of the houses out there.
By and large, carriers have relied on, a very cursory exterior only drive-by type inspection. And we have done millions of those, for all of the top 10 carriers and like across the board. Carriers have utilized that inspection type for underwriting purposes for that segment of their book, which again is far and away the largest segment for most carriers, right? And so because of that, they have very little data on these risks, right? They have half a dozen exterior photos, and really that's it. They have a few other data points on the year built, right? And they probably have a replacement cost valuation, right? That was based upon exterior only visibility, right? There was no visibility inside the home, no ability to intelligently create a highly accurate replacement cost valuation, right? Just impossible, right? If you're literally only looking at half of a structure and you have no idea what's going on inside the home, so carriers have relied on that level of accuracy, right? Which has driven the massive underinsurance issues that we have today, which is a whole other topic that we don't have time to get into.
Co-insurance issues.
Yes.
And, I think I read the other day, was it Colorado, where the AG is suing farmers?
California.
I guess I shouldn't say the carrier name because I really don't know, but I did read an article about it, and they're basically saying, hey, you insure me for this amount, I get a claim, and then all of a sudden you say, oh, you got this co-insurance penalty.
Yep.
Which, from the consumer perspective, it makes 100% sense.
Yeah. No,
that needs to be fixed.
It 100% needs to be fixed. And like, that's a part of it, right? That kind of all ties into it. So anyway, getting back to the fact that, carriers have relied for decades on these very cursory exterior only inspections. They have very little data on these homes and properties. To varying degrees, they've done very little in terms of reinspection. Some carriers will have a program where they automatically reinspect, every 3 years. Some will reinspect every 5 years. And quite frankly, some don't really have a plan in place.
Yeah.
And they have risks in their book, that they haven't looked at in 10 plus years or 15 plus years, right? Again, all that ties into the underinsurance issue and lots of other issues as well. So that has, been one of the main factors that has driven this explosion of non-weather water losses for carriers, because as these books are aging for economic reasons and otherwise, policyholders are not keeping up with the maintenance on their homes, right? I mean, when you look at roof, right? That's obviously a whole separate issue, but is, driving massive problems for carriers in terms of, roof replacement for wear and tear, right? Versus, single event damage and that type of thing. So getting back to the interior of the home that carriers have no data whatsoever on, mechanical systems are failing, right? And causing, massive non-weather water losses across the board. And so kind of all of those things coming together, like carriers are realizing that, hey, that model of inspection just is not going to work. Like, we need more data. We need more data. We need more accurate data. But the rub is it's never been more expensive, right, to send an inspector to a property especially to send an inspector inside a property. You play phone tag for a week trying to schedule an appointment with a policyholder, and then, yeah, just that field inspection game is exponentially more expensive than it used to be. So,
and honestly, there's probably somewhat of a fear about the liability from sending a 1099 employee inside a homeowner's, inside their house.
Yep, there absolutely is. There's just there's a boatload of friction there, right?
Yeah,
that presents the opportunity for self-inspection that a growing number of carriers are taking advantage of, and it ties together so nicely because when you engage a policyholder in a digital mobile experience or whatever the case may be, instead of underwriting being something that they do to a policyholder or to a property, if they can engage a policyholder in that process, wrap it in valuable education, right?
Yeah.
And again, a lot of this it ties into messaging, right? And how they position it and how an agent positions it. But now they have the ability to capture and gather all of the data that they desperately need, right? A policyholder has full access to their property. They'll take photos of whatever you ask them to. So now I'm getting photos of all the mechanical systems in the home. I know the age of the water heater, right? I know that, holy cow, the water heater is 15 years old, right? That's a ticking time bomb. It's going to cause a water loss if it's not, replaced within a matter of years. Same thing with, whatever the case may be. That's galvanized plumbing, right? That we can see under all the sinks, or, that's a.
You want to hear a quick story?
Yes, I do.
So, it ties into this very closely. So I worked from home yesterday. My wife had 3, I think, different contractors at the house. One of which was a handyman to come and look at a mold spot on the second story in my son's bathroom, which I had looked at, and I'm like, that doesn't look real good. It's kind of beyond my handyman skill. So, let's get somebody else in here to look at it. I went into the attic. I had a pretty good idea what it was. I knew the water was coming from somewhere, right? We've got a relatively new roof, so I didn't think it was coming through the roof. And so I remembered that we had replaced the water heater with a tankless water heater about 3 or 4 years ago.
Yep.
And here's the funny part: the attic was built around the 80-gallon. I guess the 80 might have been bigger than that. A big tank, right, on the original.
Yep.
And the house is coming up on I guess to the 18 years old. So we didn't buy it quite 20 years ago. We probably bought it, 17, 18 years ago, whatever. When we found out when the plumber came out to put in the tankless heater that they couldn't get the old one out. It was too big for the stairwell. So we told them just to leave it in place.
Yep.
Yesterday, I couldn't find the source of the water. So we called the plumber back out. And the plumber said, we had some difficulty disconnecting this thing. And I'm thinking, holy crap. Please tell me you drained it. Right. So I was working. My wife didn't know to ask that question. But what had happened was the person who came out and installed the tankless admitted that they had caused some water to be accumulated on the floor, the ceiling to the second story. And that was like 2-3 years ago. So it stopped. It wasn't continuing to occur, but there was enough water at the time to where, it caused some mold. So then we got a bill from the plumber yesterday, and like, okay, so you charged me $225 to come out here and tell me that there's no water leak, and the water that caused this mold was caused by your tech 3 years ago, and I got to pay this inspection bill. I'm like, holy shit. And in the grand scheme of things, we don't have a water leak. And the handyman was able to patch up the molds for it. It wasn't so bad. So anyway, it was a good story, but building an attic around a water heater, I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah, no, it's wild. And I mean, it's more common than I would like to see.
Really?
I'm amazed at how many of those we come across. No, you're definitely not the only one. But yeah, no, I mean, that underscores, right, just the importance and the opportunity with self-inspection to engage policyholders, in a process of documenting their own home and property, right? Through that process, you can educate them on some things that they should be concerned about or at least be aware of, right? Like the age of their water heater, right? Is it ending the near of its the end of its life cycle? Same thing for appliances, dishwasher, washing machine hoses, right? Like that's a big one for a good number of carriers for good reason, right? Do you have
So when you have these homeowners that are going out and running a self-inspection, do you have someone on the other end guiding them through and directing them, hey, take a picture of this, back up, move around here, or is it all self-evident by using the app?
Yeah, it's all self-guided and
Okay.
in a very thorough and informative step-by-step process, right? With
Okay.
help available
Nice.
at any point along the way.
Okay.
Help in the form of visual and text samples, like, hey, take a photo of your electrical panel, right? Well,
Yeah.
what's an electrical panel, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
don't take anything
Yeah.
for granted when it comes to
Yeah.
the average consumer, right? People just don't know. People don't have experience with things. So, so the app holds their hand, provides very clear guidance, examples, and then again, as I mentioned before, we have live support available if folks get stuck on something, or if they don't feel confident, they can call in and get support. It's fully self-guided, and we're just getting now to having some very meaningful conversations with some of our carrier partners around, like, how can we maximize this process, right, and really streamline it in some really cool ways, right? And so we're exploring opportunities for additional partnerships where, just as an example, right? Like, hey, take a photo of your water heater, right? And your water heater serial number. And based on that, we can machine read that and instantly know, hey, this water heater is 18 years old, right? And that carrier may have underwriting guidelines that says, hey, we don't accept water heaters that are over 15 years old, right? Within that self-inspection experience, like, we can provide that education and messaging, right? And say, hey, unfortunately, your water heater is, doesn't qualify currently. However, let's get this thing replaced, right? Tap here to, jump into a carrier workflow with a major retailer of appliances, right? And like, just again, make it as easy as possible, right, to provide that seamless experience where it is in everyone's best interest to get that water heater replaced, right?
Yeah. Yep.
The carrier knows that it's a ticking time bomb. It's going to create, a non-water claim in a matter of years, right, if they don't replace it.
I mean, the carrier becomes your friend.
They really do, right? And at the end of the day, the consumer doesn't want a water loss, right? Certainly there are cases, right, where people may be not in a financial position to take care of something right away, right? And like that's a part of the reality. However, there are a large percentage of people that they're just ignorant, right? Because that's the way that we are as humans, right? Nobody's thinking on an annual basis how old their water heater is, right? It's out of sight, out of mind. So again, it's in everyone's best interest, right? It's in the carrier's best interest. It's in the policyholder's best interest. So how can we facilitate the easiest possible workflow that it makes sense for everyone, right? And so if we identify an issue that needs to be addressed from an underwriting perspective, how can we help and facilitate a policyholder to resolve that issue, right? So the carrier wins, the policyholder wins, everybody's happy at the end of the day. And hopefully, as this shift and as this adoption takes place and these workflows are implemented, it starts to, over time, relieve the massive pressure that everyone is feeling, right? And that pressure that's a trickle down pressure, right? It's like the carrier has a 115 combined ratio, right? Like that has to change. And as long as that ratio is there, now, they're having to increase prices, right? And so premiums are rising exponentially to try to right the ship there. But you can only take so much rate. For you, the threshold was 16 grand or whatever, right? And for a lot of, like, everybody has that threshold, right? Depending on
everybody,
what their situation is. And so, it all ties together. It has to happen for a long-term sustainability, much less a healthy personal lines insurance market.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, with that cleansing of the book, so to speak, it's got to be repopulating the state pools. And, I know in Florida, for some of the same reasons, but largely other significant issues having to do with, cyclical and seasonal weather impacts, and the same in Louisiana. There's that constant battle of repop and depop. I heard in California that it's swelling. And I'm
It's
I'm
yeah.
not a big fan of that either. I don't know what the answer is, but it's not a swelling of the government program. That's never designed to be that. So I
Yeah,
mean, what are you seeing there, and where does the bad business go?
California's in a California's in a tough spot. We're on the heels of Florida and some of the coastal states, but with our own unique characteristics, right? Like there's a lot of similarities, but then there are unique
Yeah,
factors as well.
yeah,
Obviously, the main unique factor being the primary peril that is driving all of this, right? California is in a really, I don't like to be the boy who cries wolf, but it's in a precarious situation right now. The volume of business that is getting shoved into the FAIR plan is obviously exponentially larger than it's ever been.
Do you know what that county is? How many policies they have now?
It's somewhere around 350,000 right now, something like that. And it is, but they are, I was literally just talking on LinkedIn with someone that works there just on the customer service side, but she said that internally, they had been told that they were processing, 2,500 applications a day right now. And so they're adding, 30,000 plus policies a month.
Yeah, I mean, at that rate, they'll get to 1 million in a couple of years.
Yeah, right. And the rate, like that rate is continuing to grow, right? It's not like they've leveled off. Like, they were saying
Right.
that, 6 months ago, they were getting 1,000 policies a day, right? And it's now over 6 months, it's up to 2,500. Like that momentum and inertia, is continuing to grow. So, the reality of the economics there and just where they're at, I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head. I want to say I'm going to butcher the numbers, right? They have $200 million of surplus and they have many, many, many billions in exposure,
Yeah.
right? And again, that is growing every single day.
Yeah.
If, heaven forbid, if there was another 2018 fire season, right? The FAIR plan would be insolvent basically instantly, right?
Yeah.
And I do think that is a significant reason, a big part of the reason that a lot of the major players are pulling out, right? They do not want to have that exposure because if the FAIR plan becomes insolvent, then that assessment is coming their way, right? Like they're footing the bill for that. And they're footing the bill back 24 months, right? In other words,
Oof.
for the carriers that pulled out 12 months ago and have not written business, like they still have another 12 months of exposure, right?
Really?
So like they're trying to get through
like a clawback on whoever was there.
Yes. Yeah,
wow.
Exactly. And I think like that's going to be a major hurdle. I feel like, again, this is just my personal opinion. Nobody has a crystal ball. And obviously, I would love to be a fly on the wall with some of these conversations at the major carriers with the DOI. Like I seem to hear a lot of like super optimistic, like, oh yeah, we're going to get all the major players back. Like things are moving in the right direction. And I think that definitely some positive things are happening, but at the same time, I think that's a big factor. Like carriers are not going, as long as the FAIR plan is sitting in the financial position that it is today, like no carrier's in a hurry to come back, right? Like they're doing a financial analysis there and saying, look, if we are one major fire event away from the FAIR plan going insolvent and us putting the bill in by way of assessment, like there's no incentive there for them to come back,
Does 100% of that go? Does 100% of the shortfall go to the carriers? Because I know in Florida, I guess somewhere around, I don't know, it was early 2000s, I think, where law was rewritten to say that if Florida citizens goes not belly up, but if they can't pay the bills,
yep.
They can first do a chargeback to the carriers, and if they can't there's a cap on that, I think, and I'm sort of making this up as I go, but
yeah,
at the end of the day, they can actually go and they can tap into any type of policy. It doesn't have to be, a property policy. It could be a freaking workers' comp or a D&O or an E&O. I mean, the outreach for that it seems like it doesn't really have any end to where the legs can go, which is kind of scary. And I think Florida is as bad of a situation as what it's been. It's getting a little bit better, but they've been pretty fortunate because there was a long period of time where they really didn't have any major events. And honestly, the major events that they've had lately, they've been pretty lucky because of where they hit.
Yeah. Yep.
So,
No,
we haven't seen that cataclysmic, all the stuff hits the fan, can't pay the bills, but that exposure is sure there. I don't know where they're at today, but I know that they surpassed 1 million. I want to say they're back down to maybe 800,000. But I mean, that is a really, really big number. And I don't think they have the pricing issues that California has, for so I don't know a lot about all of this stuff in general. I know more about Florida and Louisiana than I do California, but I follow up on California some. And from what I read, there's such tight control about rate increases. And, it takes an act of Congress to get right size rating. So I'm wondering, maybe, how does the state pool have to price itself relative to the market? Is it
yeah,
supposed to be 10% above the market?
I'm not intimately familiar with that, and so I don't want to.
Yeah.
I don't want to speak out of turn on it. But I do know that. I mean, I do know that today, the FAIR Plan is still one of the major concerns, right? Is that with all of this, massive growth that they're experiencing,
Yeah.
they're not experiencing that growth at an actuarially sound rate, right?
Correct.
Like they're not
Yep.
they don't nearly have the rate that they need to have, to actually be building some surplus, right? Like
Right.
they're not.
Right.
They're
Right.
not building surplus, even without any cat events, right? Without any wildfires. So it makes the situation that much more. I was looking up some numbers here. That's why I'm kind of looking off screen. But I'm looking back at 2019. They had requested a 35% increase, and they got 15% approved, 15.6% approved. They turned around in 2021 and requested a 48% increase, and they only got 15.7% approved.
Wow, yeah.
Right. So like they're underpriced by like over 50% today. It's like, it's not funny, but it kind of like, what else do you do? Like,
I was just about to say the same thing. What do you do except, laugh about it? You and I don't have any control over these things. And, the writing is on the wall and it's very obvious, but you got the powers that be that just, it's all political to me. I mean, it's just political. Nobody wants to be the bad guy. Nobody wants to set reality, right? You operate in a imprudent manner, and you just hope that these things don't happen. It'll get you so far.
Yeah, that's just it, right? And I mean,
It probably gets you through your term, and you go out looking like a great guy,
The one legislator I was listening to the other day, said it very well. He's like, "This is a horrible gamble." He said if this was happening on Wall Street, you couldn't get away with it.
Yeah.
It's
I
just,
don't know about that either. 2008. It happens everywhere, and
Yep.
I don't know. Segue out of this serious insurance discussion stuff, and let's talk about your alter ego.
I was afraid that might come up.
By the way, is your alter ego also Curtis, or do you have a special name?
There is a special name. But it hasn't really officially been revealed yet, but it is. Okay. It's going to be very soon.
Okay.
So, actually, I'll show you. I don't know if my camera will focus here, right? But
loss ratio.
That is it. So
that's the official name. Okay, that's very cool. So, was this your brain job?
Yeah, it kind of was. And, I really just in the last 12 months did I kind of fully just throw caution to the wind and embrace it fully. And
yeah,
it's been great for business. It's exploded my network. Like, I've not had any side effects from it yet, other than, the bling gets kind of expensive, but that's all a part of it. So
hey, you can write it off.
Right. And it's a ton of fun. It is. It's a ton of fun. It keeps it can keep me in a decent mental space when, it seems like everything else is falling apart. And
I'm guessing that, the more comfortable you get with it, which just naturally happens over time, and I won't say risque, because I don't think it's risque, but the more, you put yourself out there and the more fun you have with it, What was it like the first time? I mean, was it pretty similar to what, I see you do today? Did you actually come out performing, or was it just a picture, or?
Yeah, no, the first time was terrifying. That was
Yeah.
4 years ago. I mean, you can still dig back and find that music video on my LinkedIn.
I was gonna ask if the original one's there somewhere.
It is. You can find it, and it's definitely like they've definitely improved over time. So it's a bit underwhelming if you look like any work that you've ever done, right? When you look back at the beginning, you laugh at yourself because of how horrible it was.
Of course.
Um, but yeah, that first one, like I was terrified to put that out there, literally terrified. And so
Yeah.
I very purposely sort of called it like a collaboration with the Insurance Nerds group and organization, and said like, hey, this is produced by Insurance Nerds, so that if it went really badly, I could kind of step away from it and say, well, this wasn't my thing, this was their thing. Yeah, I could go into a whole story there, but
So no pushback, no, hey, you need to quit doing this. Insurance is all blue jackets and white shirts and that kind of stuff. Did anybody give you that?
Well, I'll just share this really briefly, right? Like that very first one, I had given a shout out in the lyrics to Rob Galbraith, who was the innovation director at USA for a long, long time. And he had just published his book, The End of Insurance as We Know It. So I'd given him a shout out kind of selfishly in hopes that he would like kind of pick it up, and that I would get some exposure through him. What I never could have imagined was that he was not only going to share it, but he literally started playing it everywhere he went on his book tour. And so that video was getting played at conferences like all over the country. And so I knew that like it was going to I knew it was getting out, right? Like people were seeing it, and I was terrified because I knew that my clients were going to see it eventually, right? And like I had no idea what to expect.
Did your boss know?
No, he did not at the time.
That's fun.
Yeah, so it did not take long. I mean, a couple of weeks later, we were, I was on a call with one of the largest tier one carriers, our biweekly call that we have with them. And their director of underwriting started the call with, hey, Curtis, I was at a conference last week, and I think I saw you on the big screen. And of course, all the blood runs from my face. And it's just like this awkward pause that felt like it lasted forever. And I thought, I'm done. It's over. My career has ended. And I'll never forget the next words out of her mouth. She said, that was pretty awesome. And
that's cool.
Fast forward to today. So there really has not.
Good for you, man. I got
any negative pushback.
It really, I've done a little bit of that, and I've always felt like insurance needed somewhat of a shakeup. And so some of the stuff that I have done and that I'm looking to do more of, honestly, and admittedly, you gave me the confidence to be able to do it and put it out there a little bit more. So I appreciate that. And honestly, it's good to see, because everybody seems to just dig it. Right. And, it's been fun to watch you and follow you, and to see you have so much fun with it. And you're super talented, and it's like really entertaining. So
Yeah.
I mean, kudos on the, marketing. And I imagine that if I asked you, you'd say, tell anybody, hey, put it out there. You got to be you, right?
100%. Like I never would have. I wish that I can't imagine like where I would be today if I had embraced it fully 4 years ago, because of what I've experienced over the last 12 months, and like where I think, it will go over the coming years. It's mind boggling, to I think from a professional perspective, just to when you get that many eyeballs on your work, right? When you get to the point where hundreds of thousands, millions of people are seeing something that you created, right? And for us, like for my company, if I make a post and it gets 1 million impressions, right? 99.999% of those million people probably doesn't matter for my business, right? But the 10 people that do matter is a huge deal, right? It's like the law of large numbers, right? Like when your stuff is getting seen by so many people, it's gonna get seen by the people that you want to see it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's super powerful, and
Very cool.
and I'm super excited to see where it goes. Nice.
Thoroughly enjoyed the time together today. It's been very informative and super educational and super inspiring. And I'm really looking forward to see what you do in the future, both with your media side and the growth of the business.
Absolutely.
So,
No, I appreciate the opportunity. Really enjoy these conversations, and I think they're important conversations that that the industry as a whole needs to be having. So
yeah,
it's been a lot of fun.
Sure. Yeah, great stuff. All right, Curtis, I'll let you get back to it. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Take
Thanks
care.
so much.